Welcome to episode 54 of the Forward from 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 who are pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories, their way, in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50, and your host for today's show. Today I have the privilege of interviewing a prominent neuropsychologist who specializes in working with people who are experiencing cognitive decline. Dr. Mitchell Clionsky has invested the past 35 years doing more than 25,000 evaluations of people over 60 who are experiencing cognitive decline, dementia, or mild cognitive impairment. It's an important concern for more than 80% of people over the age of 50. I suspect that's because we all know of someone who was once a vibrant individual who became a shell of their former self because of cognitive decline. We certainly hope that won't happen to us. The good news is that with proper attention now, the likelihood of experiencing dementia can be reduced by as much as 50%. Two major studies have confirmed that statistic in recent years. To tell us more about those studies, what the results showed, and how to reduce your chances of experiencing dementia, please welcome Dr. Mitchell Clionsky to the show. Thank you for joining me today, Mitchell. I really appreciate the time. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in dementia research and care.
I'm a neuropsychologist, which I tell people basically means that when people come to see me, I test how they think. I measure their abilities to pay attention. We look at how well they're able to learn and remember new information. We look a lot at their planning and problem solving, what we call executive functions. And then we take all of this and more and put this together and compare with what someone is expected to be able to do based on their age, based on their education and occupational background, so that we're able to fine-tune this. So I've been doing this now for 45 years.
Wow.
I whisper it. Seeing people with cognitive decline, with dementia, mild cognitive impairment, for 35 of those 45 years. This point, counted it up the other day and estimated that it's probably about 25,000 evaluations on people over the age of 60 that I've done. So I've had a lot of experience in this area. I've seen a whole lot of people from many different backgrounds. And the best part of it is not only is it a helping profession, I really like the ability to be able to make an impact on people's lives. But for me, there's always some new question every single day. And that's what makes it so interesting, because the brain and how the brain works, I still find is fascinating now, perhaps even more so than I did when I was younger, because we know so much more and our tools are so much better now. So I just became involved in this, and it's grown over the course of the years.
Very good. I think that's an issue that is of concern to anybody over 50. Many of us have witnessed what has happened to people who've come down with dementia and had to contend with that. And it's scary for some people, and it's top of mind for a lot of others who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Is dementia inevitable as people age?
No, it's not. And in fact, I agree with you entirely in terms of how it is that people are concerned, because the data shows us that if you're 50 years or older, that the research says that 80% of us are somewhat or very concerned about this. And the good news is that with proper approaches, we can reduce the likelihood of dementia by about 50%.
Wow.
And most people are amazed at that statistic, but it's not my statistic. It's statistics based on well-developed research from very large groups. The two primary groups that form this statistic are a group called the Lancet Commission, which is located primarily in Great Britain. And they started back in 2017. They published the results of their first large-scale analysis of the data, where they identified 9 different factors that would reduce the risk of dementia by about 40%. About 3 years later, they published an update. They had gone back and looked and actually had come up with 3 other areas that they thought were important, and that further increased their probability. A couple years after that, here in the United States, we took the same factors, the 12 factors that the Lancet Commission had come up with, applied it to about 2,000 people whose data was available through something called the U.S. Health and Retirement Survey. Our group in the United States estimated that about 60% dementia cases could be avoided. So when you have 40% and 60% as two different established measures,
Wow.
I think it's easier to say 1 out of 2 cases are preventable. And the question becomes, how do you end up in that good area, not the bad area? How do you reduce your risk?
I would agree. I noticed one of the charts in your book talks about the global decline in brain function from people who are 25 to 70 years old. And it looks like by the time people are nearing 70, they have lost 40% of their brain function naturally. Is that a fair statistic?
That's fairly accurate in general ways. So we know that objective measures of processing speed, attention, memory do go down for most people. This is the average person, the one who's in the middle of the pack. It's not true for everybody. And some people have lost a lot more than that by that point. But yeah, there is, the same way we've lost, look at your speed of running today.
Absolutely.
And what it was when you were 20, and you've lost a few steps along the way. There's a few miles per hour off my fastball. I know that for sure. Hopefully I'm throwing better curves and sinkers now than I was back then to compensate for the fact that I'm not fooling anybody with my fastball. And the same way, thinking abilities is not just the raw processing speed. It's not just the raw number of details we could remember, but actually how wisdom and understanding of how we think can guide our judgment and wisdom for making decisions. So there's a positive spin to this, as well as the fact that, yeah, we're slower and we don't remember quite as much as we used to.
I noticed the chart was spot on. It starts noticing a decline in the ability to remember things shortly around your 40th birthday. And that's when I noticed it was harder and harder. And now that I am in my mid 60s, it's getting even more difficult for me to recall things.
I can tell you that one of the things that we work on a lot is helping people to preserve their cognition and ways in which their health in general, but specifically their cardiovascular health and their habits, their lifestyle habits, impact that speed of access, impact their ability to learn and remember new information, to solve problems. So a careful analysis of what's going on can help determine why that's occurring and maybe what you can do so that you fix it. So I don't think it's inevitable.
I think people would be surprised. There are many different types of dementia. I know that I would automatically assume that Alzheimer's is it, but your book lists almost a dozen different types. What are some of the causes of dementia?
So we think about dementia as like a broad category under which there are a number of brands. If you say, I'd like some jeans, fine. You could have some Levi's, you could have a whole variety of different kinds of brands. Or if it's a car, you could have an Audi, or you could have a Saab, or you could have a Porsche, or you could have a Chevrolet. So what we typically confuse is thinking that Alzheimer's disease is all of dementia rather than a brand, a type of dementia. Vascular dementia is probably as common in either by itself or in combination with Alzheimer's disease as anything else. So vascular dementia is caused not just by strokes and TIAs, otherwise known as transient ischemic attacks, but also by changes in blood vessels that go into our brain and their ability to carry oxygen and nutrients to all the different endpoints, like the branches of a tree, endpoints to them with leaves at the very end. We need to get oxygen and nutrients to the very tips of our circulatory system. So hypertension, smoking, which causes changes in our blood vessels and circulation, diabetes, which is a major cause of changes in our circulation and the nerves around our blood vessels. Those kinds of things have a significant impact on how our brain works. Sleep apnea, the inability to breathe well enough while we're sleeping, deprives our brain of oxygen and causes damage to the endpoints of our vascular system. So that's a real big one, and one of the more common things that I see. Frontotemporal dementia, what Bruce Willis has, is also a very important type of dementia, usually earlier onset, usually in your 50s, maybe in your early 60s, whereas Alzheimer's disease really and vascular disease really begin to be noticed more in our late 60s to 70s and 80s. Parkinson's, there's dementia that happens. It's not just a movement disorder, but also can affect our thinking. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is big words for saying getting hit in the head too many times through sports or other kinds of concussive events. Even things like drinking too much and alcohol causes real damage to the brain when it's excessive.
So it sounds like a bunch of these things are issues that we have control over. And that is whether we choose to smoke, how much we choose to drink, what kind of quality of sleep we're getting every night. Do we play that big a role in this?
Absolutely. You're that spot on. Even things that we think, Greg, are pretty much benign. You're having some sleep problems. I'm going to go to the aisle of my pharmacy, and I'm going to look there to see what they have that doesn't require a prescription that I could take to help me sleep. So you go through these and you see all these things that have a PM at the end of them saying, oh, it's for night. There's Advil PM. There's Tylenol PM. There's all these different things. Sleep aid was somebody was telling me. I said, well, what is in there? They said, well, it's called sleep aid. I said, I know, but so that's the brand. It's called sleep aid. Okay, fine. What's in it? They said, I don't know. I said, I bet it has something in it called diphenhydramine, which is longhand for, and if you're taking that along with perhaps a medication so that you don't pee very often to tighten your bladder, that also has similar kinds of things. And you may also be taking a heart medicine or a depression medicine or a medicine for a cold or for sinus problems. All of these things add up and have what's called an anticholinergic burden. They reduce the level of acetylcholine in your brain. What's that do? It dries us out, which is why we're taking it for certain things. It makes us sleepy, which is why we're taking it for other things. It also slows down our thinking ability and causes us to feel spacey and can get in the way of being able to think. Now, does this cause dementia? It may, but it's also a reversible cause for the cognitive impairment that looks like dementia. One of the things that's really available for people if they want to is to go up online and to type in this anticholinergic burden, basically what this causes in terms of its impairment. You'll get an anticholinergic burden calculator where you can plug in every single medicine that you take, either over the counter or prescription, and it'll give you a score. And you can add those up and see whether or not you're taking too many things that have an anticholinergic burden, which is a really cool thing because then you could decide if it's over the counter, do I really need to take that? Or if it's not, if it's prescription, you go to your doctor and say, I'm concerned about this. Can we find an alternative? Maybe the medication I'm taking so I don't have a problem at night in terms of getting up too many times to go to the bathroom, there's other types that actually are lower in their anticholinergic burden. Maybe I could find a different way of going to sleep. Maybe I could do something else for my allergies. There's ways of working around some of these.
I would imagine that is true, that people would go directly to the drugstore and look for a pill, because that seems to be the American way of dealing with any kind of health problem, is pop a pill and it mysteriously disappears. So they'll start taking melatonin or some of the other drugs that you had mentioned to fall asleep. That seems like it's counterproductive because your body then requires that in order to fall asleep. And you're saying, I believe, that there are other things that we can be doing to prevent or to prepare our body to get the rest that it might need, or eat the right foods to preserve our brain health in some way. Is that right?
Well, certainly the sleep thing is very true. People have developed terrible habits in many cases on how to sleep. What happens is that we try to go to sleep and we're not sleeping, and then we try harder, and that just gets in the way of sleeping because you don't really get yourself to sleep. You surrender to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
They also get into bad habits where they will say, oh, I'm so tired because I didn't sleep well last night. I'll go to bed earlier tonight. But they're not really going to bed to sleep. They're now setting up shop in their bed. They're watching TV. They're looking at their phone, scrolling through their social media. They're talking on the telephone with people. They're eating a snack. This confuses our brain. Our brain saying, what am I doing here in bed? Oh, I guess I'm just hanging out. I don't really need to sleep. And then at some point, your brain's supposed to understand, no, I really want you to sleep right now, but it doesn't have that signal going on. So one of the first things we do when people are having trouble sleeping is we tell them, you got to change your habits around sleep. You need to stop using it as a place to live. And I don't want you to go to sleep earlier if you're tired. I actually want you to go to sleep a little later. I said, really? I said, yeah. I know you're worried you won't fall asleep, and that's part of what's getting in the way. But you actually find that you're probably not sleeping, you're not sleepy enough because you're so tired. You've also stopped exercising. So you're sitting around all day. You're not really all that tired. You're trying to force yourself to go to bed. You're then doing things that keep you awake. Isn't it surprising that you're having trouble sleeping? It's not surprising at all. It makes perfect sense when you view it through that lens. So we have to change how we approach things oftentimes to achieve a better result.
I've read somewhere a couple of years ago that it's important to make your bedroom a bedroom. That's what you do, is you go there to sleep, have the temperature controlled, the light controlled, etc. Because you're right, so many people put a television in their bedroom, or they're watching their phones or whatever it might be, and that screen just works to signal the brain that it's time to work, not time to sleep.
And in fact, the blue light from your screen may actually be impinging on some of the wakefulness areas of your brain, causing them to send out hormones that wake you up. So yeah, monitoring the amount of light is really critical.
This whole part of sleep and sleep apnea was attention getting for me in your book, because I believe I suffer from that, although I live alone, so nobody could tell me if I snore. But my daughters, who have been with me at times and when I stay at their house, say, yeah, Dad, you need to have that looked at. The whole idea of wearing a mask for a CPAP machine, though, is bothersome. And I think a lot of people resist that.
They do.
Are there other alternatives?
Let's first talk about your resistance to the sleep, okay? Because 18 years ago, when I was diagnosed with sleep apnea, I also had exactly the same concerns. And it's not just us. It turns out that only 40% of the people who are diagnosed with sleep apnea actually stick to wearing a CPAP mask and using the machine. So starting at the beginning, what is sleep apnea for those people who don't? It's the event of not breathing while you're sleeping. So it's measured by two different things. The first thing are the number of times you stop breathing per hour while you're asleep. And the second is the number of times that your oxygen level drops by 4% or more. The first of these, when you stop breathing, is called an apnea. Begins with an A. The second of these, where your oxygen level drops, but you're still breathing, is called a hypopnea, H. When they take the A's and the H's and they add them up and divide by the number of hours you're sleeping, they come up with an AHI, apnea hypopnea index. If the number here is 5 or more, 5 times or more per hour, that your breathing gets dysregulated, then you've got obstructive sleep apnea. Now, here's something that probably you've never heard because it's only been out in the past couple months. The recent research looking at large-scale study of otherwise normal people, ages 58 and older, drawn from 7 different places, research centers in the United States, 6,000 people, so big sample. One night overnight sleep test revealed that 50% of them had sleep apnea.
Wow.
Huge. By the time you get into your 70s, it's probably closer to 70%. In the population I see the most of, people with cognitive problems, it's even higher. So I send people out for sleep studies all the time And they almost are always positive. And that's because I tell people I'm fishing in a well-stocked pond. I know statistically, if you've got cognitive problems and you're over the age of 70, there's a real good chance you have this. And the beauty is it is fixable. And the most effective treatment, the one that'll get that AHI down practically to zero in most people, is continuous positive airway pressure, CPAP. It is a machine that puts room air under pressure, pushes it out onto a hose that goes to a mask that you wear either over your nose or under your nose or over your nose in your mouth. It also usually sends it through a little reservoir of water that you fill every night. So it keeps your nose and your throat moist enough so that you're not bothered. Now, most people initially say, I don't want that. That sounds like a horrible thing. I don't want anything on my face. I'm going to feel old and sick, and I definitely won't feel sexy. So I hear this all the time. What I tell my patients is that, first of all, if you're a man, chances are if you have sleep apnea, you're not doing as well in the bed as you should be. Turns out 50% of the men who go for that little blue pill to an ED clinic suffer from sleep apnea.
Wow.
They're not getting enough oxygen out to the very tips of all of their blood vessels. One of the reasons why they're having trouble in bed. So if you increase the oxygen level, you're actually going to have an easier time in romantic areas.
Interesting.
Sex is going to be better. And while you could wear your CPAP mask during sex, most of the time, perhaps all of the time, you're not going to put it on until afterwards, till you're ready to go to sleep. So no, it's not going to make you less sexy. In fact, your bed partner, who no longer is hearing you snore, is going to be much happier as a result. And you're going to wake up in the morning with more energy and probably better thinking and attention than you've had for years. Turns out oxygen is really critical to think. It's also critical to making energy molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's also critical for flushing out the toxins that develop in our brain while we're awake. So it's a really good thing to get oxygen. Who would have thought that was possible, that oxygen would be good for us? That really is. Question is getting people to use this. And that's where you have to overcome some real initial resistance and also get them to practice wearing their CPAP while they're awake. That's one of the critical ways of getting used to it. Why? I mean, think about it this way. You're taking something like this mask hooked up to this machine, you don't have real experience with it, and you're going to try to put it on when you're trying to go to bed, where you're trying to relax, where you're trying to put the cares of the world out of your mind. How likely are you to be able to do that at the beginning? And you're not. So I get people to actually practice, sometimes starting with just the mask, not hooked up to their machine, for about a half an hour a day, just sitting there doing nothing. Look at the birds outside, listening to music, maybe watching television. Mm-hmm. So that by the second week that they're doing this, they're now hooking it up to their CPAP machine. By the time they're actually using it at night, it's like they're having a friend. Oh, I know how this thing works. I know what it feels like. I know how to take it off and put it back on again. So our rates of success with getting people to use CPAP are more like 70 to 80% rather than 40%, because of the way we approach it in a real sort of general kind of progressive way. If there's one message that I would have your readers or your listeners come to understand, is that A, oxygen's really great, that B, you're probably not getting enough of it if you've got sleep apnea, that C, this is something which you can be successful in treating, and D, it's going to make a big difference in your brain health.
The most impressive thing of your book was a case study by a patient named Charlie P., for which you completely reversed the effects of dementia just by improving his sleep. Can you talk about that?
That's a great study. It's a real true story, too. This guy came to us at age 57, I think it was, when he first walked in the door. And He was having problems thinking. He was having problems in being creative. He felt very different from how he had been in the past. His wife was bitterly complaining about his inability to do the things he used to do. And we tested him, and he came out with what looked like mild dementia. We also were able to get a particular kind of imaging study of his brain called a PET scan, positron emission tomography. The way this scan works is it picks up on brain activity. It looks like Doppler radar. That on the news where they talk about the weather and they're showing where the storms are, and these storms are all yellow and red, and there's no storms, it's green and blue. Same thing is true. And the sad things about the book is we can't publish this in color because it's a really dramatic kind of image. But his brain was downregulated. It wasn't operating enough. It wasn't taking up this particular kind of tracer that's used in the PET scan. And so he didn't have enough storms. There just weren't enough activity going on. And the radiologist who interpreted this study said, this is what we see in people with mild Alzheimer's disease. So we actually saw him 3 times. We saw him again about 6 months or a year later, tried to get him to take some Alzheimer's types of medications, didn't like any of those, came back for retesting, which was unchanged. He had a second PET scan. It was the same. About a year and a half later, dropped out of our treatment. About a year and a half later, he shows up again. And his wife comes in with him, and she says, I've got my husband. We said, what do you mean? He says, he's now doing the things that he used to do. He says, I'm really happy. He says, I've always wanted to write poetry, and I've started writing poetry for the first time. He said, really, this is really weird. Let's go back and test him again. By this point, his testing is normal. Sent him back for a third PET scan. It's now completely normal. His brain activity is way up to where it should be. So we're looking at what caused this. He said, that sleep study that you sent me for a while back, I actually went and got it. And I decided that I was going to follow through and use the CPAP because I've got severe sleep apnea. Oh, he said, yeah. He says, the best thing I ever did. He says, my energy's better, my thinking's better. And he was like the happiest guy. And I saw him later on. Actually, he came in 5 years later with his wife, who unfortunately she was older than he. His wife was developing some cognitive problems, and he was still doing great and still using a CPAP every night. So it was a real success.
That is an amazing story. And so you've got my attention on this because it's a problem that I think I might suffer with because I'm tired all the time, every day, all the time. And It's probably because I'm not getting enough sleep. Is this something that affects men more than women, or does it affect both of them equally?
We used to think that it was men more than women. We also used to think it was just people who were overweight. So some of the original scales used by physicians to determine if someone should get a sleep study gave extra points for obesity, extra points for male gender. If you were a guy with a thick neck, you took 18 or higher neck size on your shirts. That would give you an extra point. We've now learned that no, this isn't the case. Thin people also have sleep apnea. Women, when you test them, actually have it as much as men, particularly if they're older, because when they're younger, the estrogen, the hormonal estrogen, protects their airways to a greater extent. With older people, it has to do much more with the strength of the muscles in our neck. When women go through menopause, which is happening even in the 40s these days for many women, they lose that hormone and their breathing becomes very much like men. So I encourage my women patients just as much as the men this tested. We also get great results for them as well.
Do they need a sleep study, or can we just assume that most of the people have sleep apnea and could benefit from a CPAP machine?
The new sleep studies are home studies by and large. So you do need a sleep study. It does need to be read by an expert. But basically what happens these days is your doctor gives you a script for it. You can buy these online, or you can get them to order it for you as part of your insurance. It's covered by insurance. including Medicare, and you wear this in your bed one night. The tests vary from something that slips over one finger to things that just go into your nose. A couple days ago, there was a new device that's hooked into the Samsung cell phone that was approved for diagnosing sleep apnea by the FDA, which is a real breakthrough. I'm not sure how that's going to change the complexity and whether the sleep medicine doctors will push back and say, no, that's not good enough for, don't take our bread and butter away. I don't know what's going to happen there. But more and more, these are getting easier to obtain, and the accuracy of them is really high. So don't try to figure this out on yourself one way or the other. If I ruled the world, everyone at age 50 would start having a sleep study every 5 years, the same way we get colonoscopies.
Okay, that's good advice. So the machines are generally covered by insurance, or they're
Yes.
relatively affordable. I was looking up on Amazon or right before our call, and they're about $1,000 a piece, if I'm not mistaken.
Usually they're covered by insurance, although there are deductibles that people choose because they're trying to keep their costs down,
Right.
which can get in the way and make it a $500 purchase. If you have a prescription, you can actually go and buy it from a durable medical goods company. But they're generally, depending on the type, because there's specific types, there's specific settings. So this is not a DIY project. This is something where you really do need medical supervision for it. But we're talking about something that's typically $1,000 or less if you had no insurance and only wanted to do it on your own.
Okay. We've been talking a lot about sleep, and I don't want people to think that's the number one factor in dementia and reducing its likelihood of suffering from that. You have developed a visual model of more than 20 factors that impact dementia. What are some of the other things? You'd mentioned a few of them, but go into a little bit better detail on some of them.
Happy to do that. First of all, there's the cardiovascular stuff. Smoking, for one thing, is a big one. And anyone who is still smoking cigarettes these days should be really looking at finding alternatives, because not so much for the cancer risk. That's important. I don't want to diminish them. But what it does to our blood pressure, it does to our cardiovascular system is in many ways just as bad. Obesity, which is an epidemic in America, is also related. Everyone wants to know, what do I eat to reduce my risk of dementia? And the reality is, it's not so much what you eat, but how much you eat. You can get slightly better outcomes if you eat a healthier diet than if you eat fast food. But the real effect that you're having with most of that is by paying attention to what you're eating. You're also doing a better job of monitoring how much you're eating and what you're eating from a calories and weight perspective. That punch that so many people develop in midlife is really bad for their cardiovascular health. And anything that's bad for your heart is very bad for your brain. So working on reducing your weight to what is considered to be a normal level for your size. I'm not trying to shame anybody, but I am telling you that your body was probably designed for a certain amount of weight. It's based on your size from a muscular point of view, from your own point of view, from your height. If you are carrying the weight that it's designed for, you're not going to put excessive stress on your body. But if you're carrying that plus a lot of extra weight, that's going to have its ramifications. It's going to mess up your blood pressure, it's going to mess up your sugar control. So you get into hypertension and diabetes as being major concerns. And for some people, it will also be a factor in why they've got sleep apnea, especially if they're young. All of those cardiovascular things are really important. There's some things that most people don't even know about. For example, maybe you know, maybe you didn't, but hearing loss is a cause for memory loss.
Why is that?
And,
That's weird.
Yeah, I know. And it was one of those factors that the Lancet Commission discovered on their second pass when they went from 9 factors up to 12, and hearing loss was one of them. It turns out that when we lose our hearing as we age, and it's usually just the result of wear and tear, we are exposed to a lot of environmental noises, rock and roll, working in loud environments, and just aging. So what happens is our brains then do not receive the background stimulation that they need. We don't even pay attention to it because we've lost it gradually. So the birds are singing, we're just not hearing. Motor turning on and off on your refrigerator, you're missing, even though someone else is hearing it. It turns out our brains need that stimulation of being alerted in terms of two different areas. One is that if you have subtle hearing loss, doesn't even have to be profound, there is a thinning of the surface of your brain connecting to the auditory association areas, which connect to your memory areas. So your brain is losing cells more than it should. The second thing that we know is from a functional point of view, there is a background network called the salience. Salience has to do with finding something interesting or something I should pay attention to. Turns out when you do a certain kind of test called functional MRI scanning, you can see that the salience network in people with hearing loss is downregulated. If you give somebody hearing aids, you correct the hearing loss, not only do their cognitive test scores improve, but you have changed the trajectory of their cognitive decline. You're actually reducing their risk of dementia. These days, we've made it even more easy to get hearing aids than it ever was before. And there's more brands, and the technology is so much better than it was even 5 years ago. Anyone who's not had their hearing tested in the last 5 years should go back, because it might have been normal then, or they might have looked at hearing aids and said they didn't help me then, but they very well might help them today.
Good advice on that as well. One chapter in your book that I thought was really good, or well titled, was Everyone Wants to Feel Better, but Nobody Wants to Change. Is that, and as the older we get, the more stubborn we are to resisting change. How do you encourage people to adopt what they need to do to make those changes that are so important for their health and for their mental cognition?
Change is the essence of life. It's adaptation. And many people, just as you point out, think that they've achieved perfection, even though they'll also tell you they're certainly not perfect. But they become really intransigent to the idea that change should occur through the course of our lives. And if we know one thing more than anything else about life, is that as an organism, as a person, as a species, if you don't constantly adapt, you die. That's what makes us survive, is adapting to new environments in new ways. So I always view people as works in progress, including myself. I'm constantly looking for, what can I upgrade? What can I improve? A couple months ago, I decided, actually about half a year ago, I decided to cut out table salt, for example. I love table salt. My brother laughs about it. He says that if I could salt, I would. That's how much I love salt. And I looked at it one day as I was pouring salt on my salad, saying, I could eat this without salad dressing because it's just great with salt on it. And I thought about what he had said and said, wonder what it would be like not to do this. Just ran an experiment. I'm just going to stop using table salt. We'll still cook with it. I'm not going to be crazy about it, but I'm going to stop adding it at the table. And I know that it's one of the factors that drives my blood pressure up. I take blood pressure medicine. Despite exercising really regularly and pretty vigorously, other things that I do, despite that, blood pressure is still higher than it should be if I don't take medication. That what would happen if I just stopped adding the salt at the table? First day or two, I really missed it. By about a week, I wasn't missing it very much. And after a while, my salt sensors re-regulated to the point that now I really think twice before I add salt to anything. And most of the time, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not going crazy. I still eat a pretzel. But I've stopped salting my salads. I've stopped salting other foods before I taste them. And what I find is that when people give me something, oftentimes if I'm out to eat, it's already too salty. It's a really funny thing. We're having constantly opportunities to see what we're doing and check our behavior. What can I do to improve myself at this point? one of the things that we did with the book was, as you probably know from our website, we have a dementia prevention checklist that people can access for free. They can take it online or they can download a PDF and they can fill out this checklist. 25 questions, some of which you'll be able to answer right away, others which you might have to research a little bit because they relate to some measures or tests that your doctor may or may not have done. But the idea about this is for self-awareness and to see where I'm on target, where I'm off target, because I want a roadmap to be able to improve myself as I go on. And then I need techniques. That's what the last part of the book is really about, is how to use what we know about psychology in your own benefit, how to start behavioral change to make it easy to do and successful rather than New Year's resolutions. I'm going to eat healthier. I'm going to get better shape. I'm going to do this or that. And then by February, it's crashed and burned because you didn't do a good job of setting out what you needed to do in a way that's achievable. So you say, I can't change. I'm just stuck. This is who I am. No, it's not. It's just that you could be someone different gradually if you go in from a different perspective.
That's a great point. And that access to that checkpoint is free on your website. And where's the website?
The website, thank you, is braindoc.com. So if you go up to BrainDoc, just like it sounds, and you go into dementia prevention on the little tab at the top, click on that, you will then see the checklist. And you can click on that and either take it online, or I actually like the PDF at this point, just because it's some of the things you may need to do. You want to take a copy. You can always go back and fill it out online to get a final version. But right now, it's in 2 different formats. If you buy the book, you can get there through a QR code directly. We built that into the book.
And do you give results of the survey so that people know what to do, what the next best step would be?
We're not at yet what to do from that. That's
Okay.
The next step, which we're working on right now, is an actual, you've seen the model in our book as to how we build up these different factors. We're now rewriting the checklist so that it will generate personalized approach where it's all colored in. So all these different factors, you'll either be seeing green color to you're on target, a yellow target to saying you're close to your target, or a red saying you're off target. You can look at that to figure out, oh, here I am. This is good. This is not so good. Where am I going to start? Then I can go back later on after I've worked on some of these things and now update my profile. So we're working on that. But right now what you'll get is a list of where you're on target, where you're near target, where you're off target. So it's a starting point.
And you have co-authored a book that combines all of this information into one very valuable resource. Tell us the title of that book and where people can find it.
So the co-author is my wife, an internal medicine doctor and psychiatrist, Dr. Emily Clionsky. It's a joint project for the two of us. The book, which is published by Johns Hopkins Press, it's an academic publisher that has a lot of hoops we had to jump through to get this book, all the scientifically rigorous conditions they had, but we did that. It's called Dementia Prevention, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain. And it's on Amazon and all the other online places. You can get it at most local bookstores. It's also on Kindle. It's also on the Apple for iPad. And it's also an audiobook read by a really excellent actor, Dan McNamara, who makes it all even more interesting than we could write it.
And we should note that even though it's published by an academic press, it is not an academic book in the way that it reads. It is there are some academic parts and some scientific information in there, but most of it is just like you've been talking today. Very good at explaining complex problems and how they impact your body and how your body works. So it's a layperson will be able to fully understand what they can do to help prevent dementia or reduce its onset.
Thank you. That's high praise and is exactly our purpose. Our goal was so that anybody reading it would feel like they're sitting in the room as we're explaining it to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the original place all this developed, was sitting one-to-one. And finally, at some point, we said, we're not getting any younger and we can't see everybody. And how can we get this information out? This is too valuable to do this one person at a time. And so let's write a book. That sounds like a great adventure for a married couple to do together.
Absolutely.
Believe me, you develop new parts of your brain in this process.
It's like hanging wallpaper, but worse.
I love that.
Yeah. So the book, again, is very good, and highly recommend it that people take a look at it, because so much of dementia is preventable and based on some very rather simple changes people can make. And if they do it early enough, they can avoid or significantly reduce the onset of dementia.
Yeah, it's never too early to start. It's never too late to make a difference. We use these same techniques with our patients who already have dementia. The big difference is they're also on medications for their dementia. But we also get great results from them in most stages. Obviously, if you're really severely impaired, you're probably not coming back from it. But especially in the earlier stages of dementia, these can actually reduce the decline over time. That's one of the recent findings actually from the research, is that even people with Alzheimer's disease who embrace changes in their lifestyle have a much better chance of not progressing as fast as other people would.
That is great news. So I thank you so much for sharing your information today. And I will link to the book so that more people can read it, because I think it's good. It is just like sitting across from you in an office, having you patiently explain for the 10,001th time to a new patient why it's important for them to look at these kinds of things and to take the action that they need to take. So thank you again for sharing.
Thank you, Greg. It's been a real pleasure.
I really enjoyed speaking with Dr. Mitchell Clionsky about ways to reduce or avoid the onset of dementia. He cited statistics showing the average person naturally loses 40% of their brain function when approaching age 70, but that's to be expected because everything else in our body slows down too. There are actually several different types of dementia, and Alzheimer's disease is just one of them. Yet Dr. Clionsky explained we have control over a number of factors that lead to dementia. Medications are a big factor, as is not getting enough sleep every night. He offered some really good advice for improving the quality of sleep we enjoy. Sleep apnea, or when you stop breathing in the middle of the night due to obstructions in your airway, is a big problem impacting 50% of people over 50. And Dr. Clionsky said aversion to devices like a CPAP machine are unwarranted. New advances in technology have created equipment that does not feel as intrusive as the traditional masks and air hoses. He recalled the story of a patient named Charlie P. who was exhibiting signs of mild dementia. But after addressing his sleep problem, Charlie's symptoms were completely reversed. Dr. Clionsky also addressed some of the 20 other factors that influence dementia and the onset of cognitive impairment. He wrote a book titled Dementia Prevention: Using Your Head to Save Your Brain, which he co-authored with his wife Emily, who is a medical doctor. Chapter 1 is titled Everyone Wants to Feel Better, and They Do. The problem is few people are willing to make changes to their lifestyle or other habits to give themselves a fighting chance to avoid dementia. On his website at www.braindoc.com, people can download a free dementia prevention checklist to build self-awareness regarding their risk factors. Then, by working with their own doctors, people should be able to develop a roadmap for better mental ability as they get older. That's all I have for this week's show. If you'd like help in identifying a purpose for your life or to get help planning your next steps, I'm offering a complimentary brainstorming session to members of the Forward from 50 Facebook community. For details, connect with me on Facebook or visit www.forwardfrom50.com. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thanks for listening, and if you like this show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.